Welcome to Talkin' SEC. Writer, photographer, and producer Philip Jordan discusses the latest news and breaks down the biggest games with the best analysts around. Now, from Southeast Alabama, a state that knows its sports, here is Philip Jordan.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Talking SEC. Good Tuesday morning to everybody. we got a show for you today here on the podcast. I am Philip Jordan, your host. As always, I am from Last Word on College Football and 96.9 The Legend in Dothan, Alabama, where I'm the in-studio host and producer, Dothan Wolves Football. On today's show, as usual, Coach Max Howell will be on the show, but today's going to be a little bit different because obviously we're coming to you on a Tuesday. I'm sure everyone saw the news on Monday. Big news out of Auburn. Bryan Harsin was fired. New athletic director John Cohen coming in. So I'm going to give a little open on that before I chat with Coach Max Howell. But then Coach Howell will also give his thoughts on the firing of Bryan Harsin and new AD John Cohen. But we'll also get his takeaways from this past weekend of SEC football and look ahead to this Saturday's matchups, the two big games, Alabama and LSU, Georgia and Tennessee. You can check out Talking SEC on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. It means a lot to the show if you do that. If you leave a review, I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can also watch the show over on YouTube, either at the Philip Jordan YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all notifications, and leave a comment on a video. I'll read that on a future edition of the show. Also over on the Talking SEC YouTube channel as well. You can always email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com or hit me up on social media at pjordansec. All right. So as I said, different show. And I'll be honest with you guys, this podcast may go longer than they usually do because since I started doing these things 4 days a week, try to keep them, within the 30-minute range. I'm going to be honest with you, this one's probably going to go beyond that. But first up, with the Auburn thing, which one I was really surprised. Look, on Saturday, we saw the stories coming out. Different national outlets were saying John Cohen looks like he was going to become new Auburn athletic director. I saw some stuff online. Maybe there was some pushback. And then, maybe I was thinking maybe Sunday that would get announced. But actually, it was on Monday where that was coming. And then early in the morning, late morning, actually, the firing of Bryan Harsin was announced. And I'm not going to read the statement, but President Christopher Roberts made the firing here. He was the one listed in the statement. And what was interesting, they didn't even mention Bryan Harsin's name. It just said a change in leadership for the football team. Very interesting with that. So we knew this was coming. You knew Bryan Harsin was going to be fired at some point. It was always not a matter of if. It was just when this was going to come down. When was this going to happen? I was a believer for the longest that this would happen during the off week. After they lost to Ole Miss, I said, okay, they'll fire him now. Then he'll be the coach going into Arkansas. Didn't happen. So, and I talked to some people. I got the thought process going, okay, it's still going to happen. But it's probably now going to be after the season. Because when you look at the Auburn situation, currently the staff, who do you have on staff that has any head coaching experience? You don't really have any. You did last year with Mike Bobo and Derek Mason as your coordinators, but you don't have any right now. So that kind of did shift me in that direction as well. Saying, okay, they'll probably wait to the end of the season. This is a lame duck coach situation. He won't be here, blah, 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 blah. Then the news hits today. And look, I was a guy, talking about Bryan Harsin, I was a guy that really liked him. I thought coming in, he was different. I was like, okay, bring in a Boise State guy. We'll see how this works. We'll see how this goes. He had a good resume. He had a good resume coming from Boise. He has been very successful there. I said, okay, and there's been coaches that come in this conference before that didn't necessarily have SEC ties that were able to be successful. Nick Saban was not from the South. Brian Kelly's doing well right now. He's not from the South. Les Miles was not from the South. Or Remire was not from the South. So you look at some of those names there and you say, okay, maybe he can be successful. And he said all the right things when he got introduced. I remember that. That 4-1 mentality, 1-0 every day, all that stuff. Auburn's going to be a tough team, but it just never happened. And he did recruit. I mean, that's the biggest thing. He didn't want to go out and recruit like you should. I think he wanted his assistants to do that, and that's just not going to work. And then he's seen distance. And then you see what happened in February, where the inquiry into all different kind of things, mostly treatment of players and the former coaches leaving. And you saw a lot of former players that had left the team say he just didn't connect with the team that great. He struggled with that aspect of that. So you look at all that, and then you look at the second half classes. He's 9-12. They were 6-2 to start last year. That's amazing. They were a top 15 team too. They lost to A&M, and then a couple weeks later, you lose to Mississippi State, and then it fell apart. And all of that was Bo Nix getting hurt, breaks his ankle. He's out. Quarterback position is not good. You lose the last 5 games of the year, and you go 6-7. I mean, that's what happened. They were 6-2, then they go 6-7. And then this year's not good, 3-5. The second half collapses continued. Offensive line plays horrible. He didn't do what he needed to do in the offseason in the transfer portal. I don't think he's big, or I won't say not big on it. He's not really using NIL or understands of using it to its full potential. And then you see the story last week with everything going on with the players wanting to leave, red shirt, all that situation. So it just didn't work. That's just a simple fact. It just did not work with Bryan Harsin. And then Alan Green not being there, he was the only one guy that really had his back at the university. So when Alan Green was gone, you really knew it was over for Bryan Harsin. So now they got to move forward. And going ahead with that, Carnell Cadillac Williams will be the interim head coach, because that was always my concern. After I got thinking about more is who would be the interim coach in this situation, and now we see it's going to be a Cadillac. And he's already made his presence known with the coaching staff. Quarterback and offensive coordinator Eric Keesall has been fired. Brad Bedell, the tight ends coach, has been fired. Brad Larondo was fired, and Darren Usher was fired. So he's gotten rid of some guys. We'll see what the play calling situation is going to be going forward with that. And then the hot names: Lane Kiffin, Hugh Freeze, Deion Sanders, Matt Rule, and Jeff Grimes. And Brandon Marcello and others reported on Monday that the top target is Lane Kiffin, but Deion Sanders is up there as well. Those are 2 guys I think would recruit. Now, Deion, you're obviously looking at a guy, he's coaching at the FCS level right now, Jackson State, in the SWAC. It's a big jump in competition, obviously, but he would be able to recruit. Lane Kiffin, he would rebuild this roster quicker than anybody else on this list because what he can do in the transfer portal. And that would be key. You're going to probably spend a lot of money to get Lane, not as much to get Deion. And then there's Hugh Freeze, who I also think is a guy that could be successful at Auburn, but then there's would the SEC try to block it? And then also, is there some moral stance, for what Hugh Freeze did? 'Cause he didn't get fired for cheating. He got fired for cheating, but, not with the football team, what he was doing with his cell phone and escorts and stuff like that. Matt Rules would be a solid hire, I think, if they go with him. Former Baylor coach, Temple, he's good at rebuilding the program, not in the SEC ties, so that would probably raise some questions. Then Jeff Grimes, he's never been a head coach. He's done a good job at Baylor's offensive coordinator, but we'll see. So it's going to be very interesting what Auburn does moving forward with this. It's going to be interesting. We still got 4 weeks in the season. You're not going to most likely, I would think, hear of a coach being hired until after this regular season is over. But it's gonna be a fun couple of weeks with Auburn. Well, anyways, that's my thoughts on it. So now let's jump into my conversation with Coach Max Howell. We recorded this on Monday evening. This is a phone-only conversation, but I hope you enjoy my conversation with Coach Max Howell. Tuesday. So that means I am joined by Coach Max Howell, Troy Sports Hall of Famer, former Ole Miss and Florida State assistant, and 25 plus years in sports talk radio. Coach Howell, it is always great to have you on the show. We record this on Monday evenings, drop on Tuesday mornings. We have some interesting stuff to talk about on this Monday evening.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. But, that was one thing I mentioned just earlier before we went on. I was in Atlanta for like 11 years. And that's a big city, and we didn't have any competition. And, but it was always something happening, maybe not quite this drastic. But, there was always a coach being dismissed, or there was, problems with a kid that, been benched or whatever. So I used to get up in the morning, 3 o'clock, trying to get ready for the show, Philip, and I'd be worried about what I was going to talk about. But ours was a call-in show, see. We had a 12-line service there, and I had a board op, and a producer, and all that stuff. And, by 7 o'clock, we had enough information that I could have talked to 12. So it was maybe not as drastic as what we need to talk about tonight. So let's get to that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. If people, if you're living under a rock and you haven't seen the news, I don't know how you follow this conference, SEC, and you didn't see the news. We knew this was coming, though. It was always a matter of when, not if. But Bryan Harsin was fired on Monday, late Monday morning. 9 and 12 overalls head coach. It just saw it coming. I mean, we knew it was coming. I was kind of figured the off week, and we talked about the off-air conversation a couple weeks ago. Me and you did, and then I thought, okay, and then after that didn't happen, you think, okay, maybe they'll just wait till the season. But no, they pulled the plug on Monday. Just what were your initial thoughts when you saw the news that Bryan Harsin had been fired?
Well, it was all over the news on Saturday about the athletic director. Now, not that he'd been hired, but basically they'd made an offer to John Cohen at Mississippi State. And, of course, John has a great track record in baseball. He was at Kentucky and he was at Mississippi State. And now the athletic director at Mississippi State, been there about 7 years. Got to know him quite well. And I think he was a really good athletic director. And I think Auburn needs some more. But I'll tell you, I made a comment to some other friends. He didn't take the job with under conditions that Auburn has run the athletic department before. I can tell you, I know that much about him. He's old school and hard-nosed. And, I believe, and I think it's maybe written in his contract, he got a 5-year at $1.5 million. But he's kind of his own boss. I mean, he certainly answers to, provost or the chancellor or the president on spending matters. But as far as administrative, I think if left alone, he'll do a good job, and I think he'll do it, with class, and he won't jump at conclusions. He'll do his homework there. Now, I think the reason they fired Harsin, the fact is that probably they'd already cut a deal ready for John to make the announcement about who the next coach is going to be, and I'll look to see how that's going to work out over the next few days. I just saw where Cadillac Williams has been the interim coach to get them through the season. So hiring a coach at this time of year, and you're not going to find very many good coaches that are unemployed. So the ones that they won't, most of them will probably got a decent record somewhere and maybe vying for a playoff or a championship. That just delays the recruiting process, particularly now. In light of early signing period, I don't think Auburn's got 8 or 9 commitments up to now, and where most schools have got probably, 12, 15 for early signing day. So whoever takes it may be find themselves at a disadvantage right off the bat.
With Bryan Harsin, before we kind of jump into the rumor names that are out there, that's been putting out there already that could be people, guys, coaches that Auburn will go after. The Bryan Harsin thing, obviously, when he got hired, everybody said, well, the Boise coach, will he be a good fit? It turned out he wasn't. I mean, and you just talk about recruiting, and that was one part where he really failed at as a recruiter, because I'd seen stuff where he wasn't going out on Friday night, high school football games. He wasn't going out. I think the only time he'd go to a high school football game is when he went to see his son play, who plays at Auburn High. But outside of that, he wasn't doing that. But just seeing last year and a half with him as the head coach, for you, what did you see that Bryan Harsin, where did it go wrong?
I think the basic fundamentals. I had that conversation earlier today, Philip, on another show. And the fact is, if you watch the system and the play calling and and the position on the field and what choices they had versus the defense that were lined up. If you look at the technical side, those kids weren't prepared. I mean, the basic fundamentals is what I saw that was missing. I know Auburn had more talent than they showed. I don't know where it was. It appeared it was his system, though, that he wanted to run. Bo Nix leaves him for a reason. There was a couple of games that they lost where Big had 9 carries one, I believe, and 11 the other. If you got a running back that good, you run him 25 times in a ball game. Particularly if you have a run-oriented offense. They changed quarterbacks and went through, a couple of quarterbacks before they ever decided on the young kid that ran the offense this past week. And I thought he was adequate. I really did. I thought he's got some talent, and I don't think he was put in enough good systems, particularly on the run pass offense that Harsin was trying to run. So I think you just look at all the details that evolved through there. He distanced himself from players and for coaches and for from everybody. I mean, high school coaches, and it was a wrong fit. And we talked a little bit about that last week. It was just a bad fit. The previous athletic director brought him here from Buffalo, made the deal to bring him in, and I don't know who he had to sell to get him here, but he's gone, by the way. He went first, and I think everybody knew then that, the writing was on the wall how quick Bryan Harsin would be around.
Yeah, and and obviously the second half collapsed. I mean, the thing that's interesting, or kind of, you kind of look at it, he started 6-2 last year. They were 12th ranked team in the country. I mean, I remember not as the guy that would win the award, but his name was getting mentioned for SEC Coach of the Year. But I think last season everything went on a tailspin when Bo Nix got injured, and when he got injured, it fell apart. And then the 5 straight losses, they had all those second half classes, and you saw it this year. There's a lot. I mean, Saturday it was 17-13 going into the second half. They get the ball first to start the second half. You go down and score a touchdown in Arkansas, you're up 20-17. You've got the Auburn fan base behind you. You're at home. You got all momentum, and they fall apart. In which that was kind of the story for a lot of the games since that 6-2 start. Was they look good in the first half of games, but then they fall apart in the second half.
See, that means that there was no adjustment or very little conversation even went on at halftime. I mean, so what do the guys in the box do? I mean, they're up there, and they're supposed to be charting the game, and got certain responsibilities for different positions, and that's what's shared at halftime of what their guys are doing versus what their opponents are doing. And I just don't think, again, that leads back to the coaching. The kids weren't prepared, and they made little or no adjustments, and that was evident on the field. But I think it was. I don't even think it was way beyond just the coaching and the scores. I think it was his personality. He felt like probably he was out of place down here anyway. He took the job because it was a big high-paying job for him coming out of Boise, which he had pretty good success out there. But you got to remember, playing against Pac-12 teams is a lot different than playing against SEC teams. I mean, it's a world of difference. I challenge somebody to name me the last team out of the Pac-12 in a regular season came to the SEC and won. I mean, that'll stump a lot of folks because it's been a while. So I'm just saying that to say the quality of play in this part of the country just supersedes most anything else around the country, particularly on the West Coast.
Yeah, it just from what you are having at Boise and then versus what you're going to do in it's just opposite ends of the spectrum. And then you talk about with Cohen coming in, new AD there. Now, and it's a lot for him to say. So he seems like a guy. You said him. He's not a guy that a lot of people I've seen saying, okay, they're going to more fan talk more than anything, message board, group, Facebook, social media talk. Well, they're worried that maybe they're going to bring in a yes man for the powers to be at Auburn. From what I understand, from what you just said a few minutes ago about John Cohen, that does not sound like the kind of guy that he is. I
guarantee he's not a yes man. I mean, he's yes if you say what he wants to say. He's got his own. He's got his own plan. I mean, he knows. Look, he's been around. He played baseball at Mississippi State. He stayed the minor leagues a couple of years. Came back. He coached in the SEC. He won a conference championship at Kentucky. He competed at Mississippi State, which probably was that LSU was the premier baseball programs in the SEC when he was coaching. Then he elevated himself to athletic director after Scott Strickland went to Florida. So he's got a track record, and the Auburn folks really should be very pleased. Now I had a long conversation with a dear friend of mine today who's a huge Auburn fan, and he was concerned about the other sports. Well, you got to remember, first of all, he came up through the baseball program, so he's certainly going to take care. And by the way, the baseball coach at Auburn came from Mississippi State and worked for him. So he already knows about the baseball program at Auburn. So the point is, he's not going to disrupt things that are already there. But he was hired to correct one major problem there, and that's the football program. And I think he'll go about it in a way. I'm not real sure that they hadn't already gotten together to decide on who the coach is going to be, and that announcement will come shortly. But they wanted to get the athletic director in place first to be sure, and I have to believe that whoever that person might be, that John Cohen has given his blessing to it. He agreed that was the guy they wanted.
All right. So lastly, on this topic, the coaches, the names have been out there, the rumors, and then you saw the report. I believe more than one person put this out there online. That their go-to target looks to be Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Obviously, the name, and his name popped up before when they hired Bryan Harsin. Hugh Freeze's name has been popping up. Deion Sanders is a hot name that is getting thrown out there too. Matt Rule, former Baylor coach, former Temple. Yeah. And then, he got fired by the Panthers, and then you got Jeff Grimes at Baylor. You hear these names. I mean, does you think it could be one of these guys, and who do you think makes the most sense?
Well, I can tell you about Lane Kiffin. It's going to take, I don't know where Auburn financially is ready for this. It's going to take $10 million a year for 10 years. It's going to take $100 million to get him out of Ole Miss. Because he's making 7.5 now, and he's got complete control of everything. He can do as much as Ole Miss and Saban can at Alabama. I mean, I know that for a fact. They give him full reign. He brought in 27 transfers off the portal this year. I mean, remember they had to entertain those guys and, get them on scholarship and fix places for them to live and all that stuff while the paperwork was being done. So they give him, a full hand in that. I'm assuming that if he is the guy, then Auburn, will step back and let him run the program. I mean, the guy's been around. He's been the head coach at Southern Cal, been the head coach at Tennessee. He was raised on the sideline with his dad, Monty Kiffin, for the time he was 5 years old. I mean, he's got a blue blood track record. Say what you want to about him being at Alabama, but the fact is that he installed Alabama's passing game. He brought it with him from the NFL, and that's why Saban hired him, by the way. Now, they had blow-ups, as you know. Remember on the sideline? That was some of the funniest things I'd ever seen. But did you notice? It's like pouring water on the duck's back. Kiffin never got rattled. He just kept on calling them down the walking down the sideline. So if that's the guy, then they're sitting at 8-1 right now. They're going to probably win 10. They're going to get a nice bowl bid. So he's not going to quit over there right now. Let's see. They got Mississippi. They got Mississippi State at the end. They got Alabama and Arkansas left, and they're off this week. So that'll be interesting to see if they're entertaining the fact of, or if they offer, if Lane Kiffin will consider it. I think he would for the money, but we don't know that. We don't have any idea yet about that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, they need to make a big splash hire. I mean, this is a very important hire for Auburn, because if you make the wrong decision here, the program is already set back with what happened with Bryan Harsin, and you get worse. I mean, you can even get further behind where you are. So this is probably. I mean, this is. Maybe I'm over exaggerating, but this perhaps is the biggest hire in Auburn football history.
Oh, I think under the conditions right now it is. I agree. And remember, the conference is fixed to get bigger in 2 years. Mm-hmm. We got Texas and Oklahoma coming. So, they've got to. He goes to Texas and wins that ball game last week against A&M, but that certainly didn't hurt his prospects. So with much lesser talent, by the way. So that to me, if they let him coach, or he only has to answer, to John Cohen, then I'm not sure that won't be a good fit.
So, we spent a good 15 minutes on that topic, which we could probably go another 15 or 45 or so on everything going on with Auburn. But obviously, I always like to bring you on here on Tuesdays, too, to talk about the previous weekend, what you took away from the weekend. Obviously, not a lot of great games on Saturday in the SEC. We saw Georgia take care of business against Florida. But Florida gave them a scare there in the third quarter. Tennessee took care of Kentucky. We talked a little bit about Auburn. Ole Miss won. This past weekend in the SEC, what was kind of like some of your big takeaways?
Well, basically, I watched the big games. That gets the most comment anyway. I found it pretty interesting. Georgia wins by 22, 42-20. The line was 23.5, by the way. Same thing at Texas A&M. Ole Miss was favored by 1. They win by 3. So, those guys in Vegas know what they're talking about. That's first and foremost. So you go back and look, and I didn't have any doubt Tennessee would do what they did. I told the guys I was on the show with them on Thursday that I do in Tupelo every week. And somebody asked me, well, can Kentucky beat Tennessee? I said, they got to score more than 40. I said, he won't have to score that. What was the score, 44-7 or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
It was Tennessee did what they have to do. And I'll say this, Philip, about that. If Georgia doesn't play their best ball game, Tennessee will win that ball game Saturday. Now the lines, I think the line's at 15 or 14 or something like that. But only because Tennessee, Tennessee has proven itself this year, but they don't have a track record. Georgia's coming off a national championship, and they're undefeated, and they're playing at home. So, but if Georgia doesn't think they're going to have to play and play hard, they'll get upset. I can promise you that. Then the other one is, that we're going to end up having to play that have I know we'll talk about just a minute, will be Alabama-LSU coming up. Mm-hmm. They both were open this past week, getting ready for each other, and I can't wait to see that one. So I'm telling you that to say, by day, the only slot I got open for right now, I got to find a 11 o'clock game. Because I got the 2:30 game set, and I got the 7 o'clock game set. So it'll be an interesting weekend coming up based on what we saw last week. And of course, tomorrow night we got the first polls coming out from the bowl committee, the playoff committee. So I'll be excited to see how that is. I don't believe the SEC will get 3 teams in. I heard some scenarios today where Alabama, if Georgia beats Tennessee, they'll get 1 loss. If then Alabama beats Georgia in the conference championship, they all 3 will have 1 loss. Then how does the committee handle that? That'll be interesting to see.
There's been a lot of conversation, and you're right. I mean, I was just what Tennessee did when they're at home in Knoxville, and the black jerseys had to scare Kentucky or something, because that was just an onslaught. I mean, they opened within 2 minutes. Jalen Hyatt's going to the house with it, and then Will Levis the 3 interceptions. He did not have a good day, and he had to have a really big day for Kentucky to have a shot throwing the football. But I know with the first rankings, of course, this is coming out on Tuesday morning, so this evening. When people are listening, the first playoff rankings are coming out, and I've seen a lot of conversation. Should Tennessee be number 1? Should Georgia, whoever? If you were on that committee, Coach, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Would you rank Tennessee number
1? If they beat Georgia, yes. I guarantee you I would, and I'm going to tell you why. Because the system, it goes back to coaching now. The system is designed where you can't play zone against their pass offense because it's too spread out. Where you have to worry about, when you start worrying about from the hash mark to the boundary, where they're going to put 1 or 2 guys every time, you better be worried about the center of the field. That's why Alabama got beat. Tennessee had 4.4 and 4.3 speed at the wide receiver, and Alabama had 4.4 and 4.5 speed at the secondary. So you get outrun. You got 30 yards in between the hash marks, an open field. So I mean, the system did a great job, and Horton does a fantastic job in maximizing that. That's why I think we're going to find out about. Somebody asked about what Georgia need to do. I said Kirby needs to dress out and play back there, play a safety to see how he likes it, because he'd have to run for his life most all day. So I looked at the system that Tennessee has employed, and they've done a really good job executing it. Georgia's going to have their hands full trying to cover those wide receivers. I think they'll throw 40 times against them.
And that's the whole thing of that game, which I feel like, of course, Alabama and Georgia's offenses are different. Alabama does want to score a lot of points. Georgia, I think they prefer to keep it lower scoring, especially with their running game and with the tight ends, what they like to do. But in 4 weeks now, since the Alabama game, I've been wondering about this matchup. If Georgia can defense come out and play well, that's the kind of game they want to be in. I'm just curious, if this game does get into a shootout, can Stetson Bennett duel with Hendon Hooker? That's one thing I'm worried about.
That's a great question. I hadn't seen the over and under, but I bet it's 90. If Georgia's going to play, if Georgia wins, they're going to have to score more than 40. And how many times have they done that this year? I had looked at all the scores, but I guarantee they had scored 40 or more, but a couple of 3 times. I mean, they scored 42 against Florida. They had a couple more that they did well against, but they struggled against a couple of those teams about mid-season, and maybe they were already looking toward Tennessee. I'm not saying that I don't go to practice every day to see what they're working on, but the fact is they're going to have to come with their A game, and then defense is going to have to play, and they're going to have to flush Orton out of the pocket. But he's a pretty good runner himself. So, it's setting up to be just an outstanding football game.
So I looked it up as you were just talking there, the over-under on this one. You're going to be surprised. It's 66.
Wow.
I was shocked by that, too. I thought at least it'd be 70. I mean, in the 70s somewhere.
Well, then let me tell you what I see in my mind. Tennessee 44, Georgia 20.
There you go. Yes, that's been the whole thing with me. It's just, I guess it's kind of like, we talked about this last week with the Kentucky-Tennessee matchup. And, of course, Georgia does have the benefit they're playing at home. So that is a big benefit for them.
That's true.
Going this one. They're not going to Knoxville, which is right now, you don't want to go there with that crowd where they're going out. But it feels like Georgia's going to have to go with probably what Kentucky was trying to do, run the game, shorten the game up, win the time of possession, and just limit the possessions for Tennessee.
Very true. I think that's the only. Nobody else has stopped them. I mean, think about it. They scored 52 against Alabama. So, it's just, nobody else has done it. Georgia, if they do it, then I think Tennessee's going to have something to say about it. In other words, Tennessee throw a pick or drop it on the ground, or the special teams fumble a punt or whatever. I think Tennessee will have to aid Georgia for Georgia to win that ball game.
Another big game on Saturday is Alabama number 6, LSU number 15. Be interested where both of those, two teams land in the college football playoff rankings too. Alabama's going to Baton Rouge, and I believe we talked about this after the Tennessee game at Alabama. Last year and a half, they've seen Alabama's not the same team away from Tuscaloosa. The penalties, the turnovers. Bryce Young's got to put the Superman cape on when they go in these hostile environments on the road. And LSU's playing well going to the bye week. Jaden Daniels, their quarterback, 11 touchdowns in the last 2 games they've played, running the ball, throwing it. I mean, their offense is working. They've got some good guys on defense too as well. What is your big when you look ahead to that Alabama-LSU matchup? What's sticking out to you?
Well, I was a little surprised. I was a little surprised at the line. I thought the line would be short, but closer than that. I think it's down. It started at 15. I think it was down to 13 this morning. LSU fans are jumping on that big time. I think Alabama comes away with that. But Alabama, a couple of things, in my opinion, they got to do. Look, they can't just throw the helmets out there and think they're going to win it. They know that LSU's better. They're playing better. They had good talent, but they're playing better than they did when they lost to FSU at the beginning of the year. They listened to them, and they're taking advantage of any mistakes you make. Alabama, again, they can't have 17 penalties. They got to restrain themselves on jumping off sides and that kind of, stupid mistakes like that. It's just getting over-aggressive. They got to play their game plan. And that's what Coach Saban says. Just do your job, and everything will work out. And And I do believe. I think they win it. I think it's close. I think maybe 6 or 10 points, and I think it may go to the wire for that. But Alabama's going to have to come to play with championship attitude. That's what they're working for to get to the playoffs. And by doing that, LSU's they haven't been consistent enough to do that yet. Now, in another year, they probably will be, but not right now. Alabama's, I think, has got them at a good time. And I think if Alabama plays their game, that they go to Baton Rouge and win that was Saturday.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun this Saturday. Like you said, the 2:30 game, the 6 o'clock game. So you talked about you didn't have an 11 o'clock game. I mean, your SEC choices are Kentucky at Missouri and Florida at Texas A&M. So you've got that at 11 o'clock on Saturday.
Well, that thing at Florida at Texas A&M, that may be 7-6. I don't know. I don't look for it to be an exciting game. I don't know what Jimbo can do to make that team any better. I think he's tried everything he knows to get them ready to play. And Florida's not very good. Florida don't have a lot of depth. They got banged around pretty good this past week, so I don't know. I think Texas A&M, but I said this last week. Same thing about Ole Miss. I didn't think Ole Miss would go out there and win, but Jimbo found a way to let them do it, and they did it. So I know he's under a lot of heat right now. The best thing he's got going for him is an $86 million buyout. If it was down around 20, I think he'd be right there with Harsin. They'd be looking for a job tonight. So I don't think that's going to happen, though. I mean, they got more sense in that. Whoever's worked up that contract, they're going to have to sit with it for a while. And the talent's there. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, their recruiting class was #1 in the country this past recruiting time. They brought in all those 5-star players from all over the country, but he's not getting he found him a quarterback, I think, mm-hmm. Which that guy was the third quarterback on the roster, and he worked himself right up to the starting job. He threw the ball, I thought, very efficient against Ole Miss the other night. But I don't know. I talk about him now like, we expect him to do better. But then you go back and look at the one-loss record. I mean, he and Kevin Sumlin almost tied for the same record. They fired Sumlin for that. Mm-hmm. Go all the way back. The last time they won a national championship was 1939. So I don't know. There's got to be some other things that go on inside that the public is not aware of for that program to have stayed down to that level. Remember, they had Coach Bryan. They had Jackie Sherrill. Let's see, who else? They had 3 or 4 major coaches that come through that program, and they still couldn't win a national championship. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting now to see what happens. I may watch the Florida game in that because that may be the most entertaining between Florida and Texas A&M.
Yeah, it's the result will be interesting because I think both teams need a win. I mean, Florida doesn't need to go to 4-5, and then Jimbo needs to get some wins if he even wants to get this team to a bowl game. So that's
true.
It's a big game for both, which is different with Napier. He's in year 1. He kind of has a pass. For Jimbo, I mean, you're right. If that buyout wasn't where it is, we may be talking about him being at the unemployment line right now. But it's going to be a fun weekend, Coach. It's always fun having you on the show. Appreciate you coming on, and we're going to have some good stuff, I think, to talk about next week. The latest on Auburn, I'm sure there'll be some talk, and then, of course, we'll get to talk about this Tennessee, Georgia, and then Alabama and LSU stuff. Yep. Looking forward to having you coming back on next week.
Stella, thank you so much. I'll be taking my notes, and I'll be prepared. Thank you for allowing me to be there.
All right, everybody, once again, thanks to Coach Max Howell. Appreciate we went a good 15 minutes there on the Auburn Bryan Harsin situation. Obviously, and he has great insight on what's going on Mississippi State, Ole Miss as well, just over the whole conference. And just always appreciative having a coach on the show each and every Tuesday. And now we're going to jump into real quickly some last things, a news item, and we're going to get some social media reaction to the Bryan Harsin Auburn situation. But we did have a live comment, so you can always comment on the show when you see us live. If we do not get to it on the show, I will talk about it on a later edition of the pod. But just, Max Cruz, great idea, Roll Tide. Don't know which idea you're talking about. Be honest with you, the Coach Howell part's pre-recorded, so I kind of just let it play. I step away for a few minutes and do some other stuff, and I come back for this. But anyway, thank you, Max, for putting that in there. Real quickly, just some SEC-related news that came out on Monday. Florida dismisses linebacker Brandon Cox from program. Napier said it was time to move on from Cox and said it was cumulative effect, a bunch of different stuff happening that led to his dismissal at not one incident. Of course, he appeared to punch Georgia running back Kenny McIntosh after a fourth quarter touchdown. He had on the season 8 tackles for loss, 35 overall tackles, 2 sacks, and 9 quarterback hurries. He began his career at Georgia before transferring to Florida in 2019. So that's part of it. Good coach, change people over. Who you want your program, who you don't, and that's a blow for the Florida defense. But Billy Napier set the tone what his program is going to be. So now let's jump into it real quickly. Some comments, some social media reaction on the Bryan Harsin situation at Auburn. And let's pull these comments up real quickly. For everybody listening to the podcast, I apologize. Here's the first ones. This was on the Philip Jordan Sports Facebook page. Johnny Huff Jr., they never gave the man a chance. It takes at least 3 years to build a program with all your recruits. Ken Maddox always commenting on a lot of the stuff with the show. Thoughts. He should have been fired when he got embarrassed by Penn State. Next coach. Auburn will do what Auburn always does when hiring and have rich people making the decisions and not agreeing between themselves, which means any coach that is legit hire will say no, and Auburn will end up with, drumroll, Kevin Steele. Let's hope not. We'll have to get that Stop Steele bandwagon going again like we did a couple years ago. And then Ronnie Wilkie just says freeze. He wants Hugh Freeze as the coach. Some Twitter responses. Brian Jones, of course, a good friend from popculture.com. He just goes, I would go with Lane Kiffin. He didn't really give thoughts on the firing, just talking about who he would go. I mean, that seems like the guy they're going after the most on that one. David Knight, my colleague over at Last Word on College Football, he covers South Carolina for us. Not surprising, he is failing and Auburn is wild, LOL, Hugh Freeze. And then Brianna Jones, she is a sports reporter at WTY here in Dothan. She goes, it definitely was time. I was hoping they'd let him finish the season out only because of players' emotionally stability. I'm assuming Bill O'Brien is a top candidate. That Bill O'Brien stuff's been out there. I don't believe that for one bit. Bill O'Brien's not a candidate for an Auburn job. And then lastly, some more Facebook comments. Troy Sadowski, of course, 1988 Georgia tight end. He was on the show last week. Buyout numbers. The buyout numbers are $15.5 million. He's going to get 50% of it within the first 30 days. That's basically the deal there. Richard Holdridge, which I was on his show last week. Go check out his podcast, The Sports Beat, with Richard Holdridge. Dan Mullen, because the AD came from Mississippi State. I know that's not happening. Rhett Baxley, if I was Auburn, I would load up the dump truck of money and load it at Hugh Freeze's house until he said yes. Ha ha. I think Hugh Freeze is a candidate for this job, without a doubt. Michael Duvosky, that program is toxic until they stop the boosters from controlling things. Auburn won't be a highly desirable destination. The fan base has to realize they can't automatically be on Alabama's level right off the bat. These things take time. It seems like they never wanted Harsin there in the first place, to be honest. I wish him the best of luck. I think he's a good coach, but the SEC probably isn't suited for him. LOL. Joshua Kirkland, I wish we could get Sanders, but I doubt that will happen. It would be good for him and us as far as recruiting. It would be good for him to get to another level in the league. But when you're him, you're kind of on your own level, if that makes sense. Oh, it absolutely does. And lastly, David Morris. No, not till some of these others are paid off, but I think the new coach already picked. And that's a lot of people think. They think they already know who the guy's going to be. We're just going to wait and see when that decision is made. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it. That's today's edition of Talking SEC. Like I said, a little bit longer than what they usually are, but a lot of stuff to unpack on today's show. Be back on Wednesday. I'll be joined by Last Word on College Football colleague Brandon Eisman. We will react to the brand new college football playoff rankings. And Brandon is covering LSU. He's a LSU guy. We know he's an LSU fan. We'll talk Alabama-LSU with him as well on the show. And remember, you can follow me on social media at PJordanSEC. The podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you are on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review. I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can also check the show out over on YouTube, Philip Jordan YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for all notifications, and leave a comment on a video, live or after. I will read it on a future edition of the show. You can always email me at sportstalkphilipjordan@gmail.com. Talk to you guys tomorrow, and you've been listening to Talking SEC.
Thank you for listening to Talkin' SEC. Follow Philip on social media at PJordanSEC and the show at Talkin' SEC Pod. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time when we're talking SEC.